Good afternoon. The Committee on General Government Operations and Federal, Foreign, and Regional Affairs now convenes this hearing. For the record, today is November 13th, 2017, and the time is now 5:01 in the afternoon. In accordance with the Open Government Law, public notices for today's proceedings were provided to senators, stakeholders, and our local media. A 5-day notice was provided on Friday, November 3rd, 2017, and a 48-hour notice was provided on Wednesday, November 8th, 2017. The public notice was also published on the Pacific Daily News, the Guam Daily Post, and the Guam Legislature websites. Today, the committee will hear and accept testimony, both oral and written, on the following item. Bill number 45-34 COR, as corrected by the prime sponsor, amended by the Committee on General Government Operations and Federal, Foreign, and Regional Affairs, and substituted and further amended on the floor. Introduced by Senator Joe S. San Augustine, an act relative to removing the primary election from the Guam Code annotated, which shall be known as the Election Reform Act of 2017. Present today is the sponsor of the legislation, and at this time I would like to yield to the prime sponsor to begin his opening statement on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I'd just like to mention that we've had a couple of public hearings already on this, and it was discussed in the session. And I honestly believe the only sticking point, Mr. Chair, is there seems to be the difference in the use of the word majority. I've mentioned this before. I've asked my staff to find where in the Guam law, the Organic Act, and the federal law is the use of majority defined as 50% plus one. So far, no one has been able to do that or find that. It's not that there's three definitions of the word majority. It's either the most votes, or unless specifically stated, 50 plus one, or 80%, or 2/3. So that being said, and because of the one election that had taken place in the past where it dealt with Governor Gutierrez and Governor Hatta, that it was declared by the Supreme Court of the United States that you did not need 50% plus one, all you needed was majority. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I think that would be sufficient after all the discussion has been taking place.
Thank you, Senator. Just for the record, this legislation has already had a hearing, and it was sent back for a subsequent hearing because of some specific changes that were going to be made to the bill that were not covered in the prior hearing. And so I'd like to once again yield to the author of the legislation to be able to go over what he would advise are the changes with respect to the discussions on the floor that he would like to request the committee to include in this new version of the bill.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 13 of the bill, on line 16, to strike out or run off. This was introduced, and that was the only thing that was missing, or the word or runoff, to be striked out. And then on page 12, on the public auditor's election, it was introduced, but I guess it didn't catch it, was to strike out letter F, which is line 20 to line 23, and add letter G. In the general election, the candidate receiving the most votes, subject to the qualification established by this chapter, shall be certified by the Election Commission as having won the election to the position of public auditor. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. So the committee will go ahead and note that it has received these two requested amendments, and it will be on the record that these amendments have been presented in this public hearing. Basically, the point of those two amendments was to ensure that there wasn't going to be any confusion with respect to the public auditor election and the attorney general election having their elections satisfied in the primary election. We do have a number of individuals who signed up to testify with respect to Bill 45-34. I noticed that a lot of these names are the same names that have testified in the previous hearing. We'll go ahead and entertain the testimony. Perhaps we can try to ask the individuals to constrain it to the changes that are being discussed with respect to this particular hearing. But if anybody wishes to expound on the overall bill, we won't be discouraging any conversation to that regard. And on that note, I'll go ahead and call forward Mr. Ken Leon Guerrero, Mr. Victor Cruz, Mr. Sedfrey Lingsongen, and Mr. Joaquin Perez to present their testimony. I understand that Mr. Leon Guerrero and Mr. Perez have also transmitted written testimony.
Yep. Thank you very much. My name is Ken Leon Guerrero. I'm the spokesperson for Guam Citizens for Public Accountability. This is the third time I've testified on this bill, and I would just like to emphasize that I have talked to hundreds of people since this bill was introduced. And during the time that I've been talking with hundreds of people, Everyone that I've talked to is in favor of this bill. The only people I've talked to that were not in favor of this bill are some elected officials, some former elected officials, and political party leaders. Other than that, everybody that I've talked to in the community is in favor of this bill. And the reason we're so strong about this bill is there's no compelling reason for the government to run and fund a process that is essentially a private party process to determine who will represent Republicans and Democrats. By the same token, there's no compelling reason why the government should run and fund a process that eliminates or dramatically minimizes the chances for individuals to participate in the election to public office without being identified as a Republican or a Democrat. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Leon Guerrero. Just to make sure it's clear, your previous testimony and all those other hearings will also be included in this record.
Pardon me?
Your prior testimony and previous hearings will also be included in the record for this committee report.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Mr. Victor Cruz.
Today, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, my name is Victor Cruz, and I am the chairman of the Republican Party of Guam. I want to thank you for the opportunity to testify on Bill 45-34. I'm here today again on behalf of the Republican Party to register testimony against Bill 45-34. The bill, if passed into law, will do three significant negative things to next year's election on our voters. One, Bill 45-34 will cost the government of Guam more money. We agree with the Guam elections testimony in the last hearing that the bill would not save money and will trigger a more costly and less organized runoff election. It's safe to say that none of the 4 or 5 gubernatorial candidates and perhaps congressional candidates will not garner the 50 votes plus 1. 2, Bill 45-34 will silence Guam voters. When a runoff election is triggered, it will silence Guam voters, hampering the voice of democracy and the true will of the people. This issue was brought up before by former chairman of the Democratic Party, who shares in his testimony that absentee voters will not have time to vote in a runoff election, thus silencing this segment of the community in the upcoming election. There's a good possibility that voters who believe this bill is designed for one election will not vote in a second unanticipated runoff election. Third, Bill 45-34 will create chaos. At present, the primary election and the general election are scheduled and thus anticipated and prepared for by GEC, Guam Election Commission, Guam Department of Education, political parties, and the voters. Bill 45-34, to change all this, an anticipated runoff election a couple weeks later. This will cause GEC, management, and employees to prepare for an unscheduled runoff election, and it can cause voters to have scheduled another day to vote. It will disrupt education and cause our school to schedule an unanticipated day for a runoff election. Finally, there's a good chance that even after all this chaos and increased costs, the final outcome would result in a legal challenge by a political party, calling the runoff results into question. As a member of this committee and the chairman of the Republican Party, I'm asking voters to vote this bill down. Senators to vote this bill down. It will cost more money, silence Guam voters, create chaos in the upcoming election. Let's move on to the real issue that improves the quality of life for our people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Cruz. Mr. Lingsan.
Good afternoon, Mr. San Agustin, Secretary Regine Lee. Mr. Chairman, I would like to thank you for your fight against gas prices here on the island, and I hope you will continue to pursue it. If they will not reduce it, maybe the government of Guam can engage in doing business in selling gas at a cheaper price. And second, your issue with the tribal rights. It's very important that you schedule that issue, despite some opposition, because with the case now being challenged by AG, it will put at risk the heroism of the Chamorro Nation. The late Senator Angel Santos, Speaker Cruz, and other people that created this Chamorro Land Trust. That's why it's important that you schedule this issue right away so we can offer all our minds how to protect this Chamorro Land Trust and to gain progress. And second, Senator San Agustin, as a new Senator Pressman, I admire you for all the hard work you have done. You have introduced so many bills, and despite some of the bills that I did not agree, I have to give credit to you because for you, it's for the best interest of the people of Guam. That's why I commend you. And same as you, Senator Lee, I hope you will continue all your hard work, your presence here in the legislature, because it's important that legislatures are united, especially in conducting oversight hearing and in hearing bills like this. I hope there will be more senators that will be hearing us. And now, let me again state a quote by Galileo 300 years ago. You cannot teach a man anything. You can only help him to find it within himself. And that's what I will try to do. Yes, I disagree with this elimination of primary election. From the last testimony that I made regarding Senator Torres' 4-year extension of the legislature term, I got lost. I cannot remember the term that I should use because I'm trying to compare the two. Yeah. The term that I should use is prolong. Why you should prolong the hardship of the candidate, the hardship of the family, why you should prolong the hardship of the wife, prolong the more expenses for a candidate if he or she did not make the top 15 in the primary election. 18 years ago, I ran for senator, and I was number 23, almost 30 of us. I spent $40,000 just in the primary. I was stubborn. When I lost the primary, I like to run for write-in candidate. And Senator Mike Phillips told me that, Attorney Mike Phillips advised me that, said you have signed a covenant. You should respect the will of the people, that you should not be running as running mate, as a write-in candidate. He cited me an example of Tom Ada. He said his name is very easy to understand, very easy to write. And still, when he ran for write-in, he only got, I think, 4,000, and that's not enough. You see, that's why I listened to him, and instead I ran for write-in candidate as a board member, where I garnered 200 votes, enough to secure the position. Then that's my point. If you are not on the top 15, in fact, if you're not in the top 10 in the primary of even Republican or Democrat, it's not possible for you to win, even you extend the campaign areas up to the general election. Sometimes you wonder why, as a Democrat candidate in the primary, even you're number 23, I'm number 23, but my votes is very close to number 12 in the Republican Party, or number 10. And the number 15 or number 18 senatorial candidate in the Democratic Party have more votes in the primary than the number 7 of the Republican candidate in the primary election. Still, it's not enough for him to win the general election. That's why it's very important to have the primary election. You don't want to prolong all those hardship that will be endured by the family, especially by the wife, and by spending more money. Maybe I spend another 100,000. If there's no primary election. And still, I will not win that election because I did not reach out to the people. You only blame yourself if you lose your candidacy. There's nothing to blame but yourself. That's why I'm trying to compare it with Senator Torres' bill to extend the term, because in their bill, we don't want to prolong our wait for 4 years. We don't want to prolong our wait so that we don't want for another 4 years. We want to vote you out after 2 years. That's my point. That's the bottom line. That's why I compared the two apples. There's a similarity. Now, the second issue is the Organic Act of Guam, Section 1422. If no candidates receive a majority votes cast in any election on the 14th day thereafter, a runoff election shall be held between the candidates of the governor and lieutenant governor, receiving the highest and the second highest number of votes cast. In the primary, of course, there will be a lot of candidates, 3 or 4, and it will be hard for them to get a majority votes. If you eliminate the primary, and you will have like 6 candidates for governor in the general election, there will always be a runoff election. The runoff election will be the general election for the governor, and lieutenant governor will be the primary. And in the bill past bill that I have read, you indicated that there will be a runoff after 60 days. That would be illegal because you cannot amend the Organic Act of Guam, which specify on the 14th day, there shall be a runoff election. And I think it will be, your intention is so good to save money. I agree with you. But I believe in this situation, it will not, because of the Organic Act of Guam provision regarding majority votes and the past history of the candidates in the primary election that prove that any candidate that is on the number 12 below will have a hard time or will not make it in the general election. Now, the third issue. Regarding the conduct of primary election, Section 1504, 15404, it is mandated here that the governor and lieutenant governor shall run as a team, and whoever received the plurality votes will advance to the general election. In my position, I believe that there's a strong violation of the deprivation of rights. This law is unconstitutional because you are depriving a person to run for lieutenant governor, and you are depriving the person to run for governor if he cannot find a running mate. And then, just like what I said the last time, if you would like to run for lieutenant governor, it will be the gubernatorial candidate that will decide for your future. You cannot run because you were not chosen. No state shall make or create any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. In that case, you are depriving that person. Second, no state shall deny any person the equal protection of law. You are only protecting the person with authority that can find a running mate. That will be easy for them. You're only protecting the person that can finance his running mate for governor. Okay, now, what is my proof here? Just like in the states, all states in America, they can run for governor and lieutenant governor separately. It doesn't need to have a team. Then, even in the presidential election, the president can run for in the primary without any running mate. Only in Guam, we are allowed to have running mate, and that's illegal, unconstitutional. Because while the Organic Act specifies that the governor and lieutenant governor shall be chosen jointly by the casting by each voter of a single vote applicable to both offices, that provision can be satisfied even there's only governor without a team and lieutenant governor running without a team. Because all you have to do is whoever will win the plurality votes in the governor and lieutenant governor shall be the party's nominee to the general election. In the general election, the winning candidate for governor and lieutenant governor will team. So the Organic Act will be satisfied. The Organic Act did not tell us that we need to have a running mate in the primary election. And in the primary, you are not yet being elected. You are only voted by the people to represent your party in the general election. I have spoken this case with Senator B.J. Cruz, and he agreed with me. He told me, let's do it on the next election, not on the 2018. But he said, I want the presidential format. But I differ with him. We need to be fair with everybody. About the lieutenant governor. If he would like to run by himself, then he cannot run. See, this is, Senator San Agustin is really a violation of constitutional right of a people, deprivation of rights, the USC Code 42. And so many Bill of Rights was violated by making this provision to have a team. Because right now, I explained to Senator Cruz, the Speaker, that, Senator, it will not also harm the prospective candidates now that have a running mate. They can still run as a team, but in the ballot, in the primary election, their name, their position will be on one side for governor. And then, if you're running for lieutenant governor, you will be on the other side. The voter will cast a single vote for each office, not both offices. That's my point there. We will have no violation of law. That's why I'm still holding my case to file at the district court, because I'm trying to exhaust all effort to convince this body to hear my case and introduce a bill to repeal this. Because this will change the political landscape of electing governor and lieutenant governor. And because right now we have almost the same officers running for governor and lieutenant governor. The people of Guam deserves more candidates that will offer their ideas, new ideas, outside the box, that could improve our island. And the reality is a violation of law. Mr. Chairman, I also like to take this opportunity to commend the Speaker for always seeing me every time I like to see him. And he's really a true example of a great leader. Senator Speaker is always in my heart, and I hope he will always win the election. And on you guys, on you senators, sometimes I giving you the benefit of the doubt that some of your staff sometimes are overprotecting you. Maybe you don't even know that you are receiving some calls from the people that needs to see you, that needs to have a talk with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Lingsangan. Next we have Mr. Kin Perez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Honorable Chairman, Senator Michael and Nicolas, Honorable Senators of Imina 24 na Legislature in Guam, and this Committee on General Governmental Operations. My name is Joaquin Perez, a registered voter of Guam and a commissioner on the Guam Election Commission, representing the Democratic Party of Guam. Mr. Chairman, I thank you for the opportunity to offer my personal views on Bill number 45-34. My statements are my own and do not represent or reflect in any way the position of the Democratic Party or the Guam Election Commission or any of its members. Bill number 45-34's singular intent is hopefully the reduction of expenses associated with the conduct of Guam's primary elections. Simply stated, Bill 45-34 proposes to eliminate the primary election process solely for the purpose of eliminating the cost of conducting that election, ostensibly to make those funds available for appropriation for other community needs. As written, the legislation also hopes to reduce the cost of running for office to individual candidates. Personally, I find it difficult to see how, nor do I believe that this legislation will accomplish this lofty goal. Candidates will spend whatever he or she chooses or believes will result in his or her election. When my late wife ran in 1994, she managed to spend over $30,000 just on the primary. She came in number 22 on the Democratic ballot. By this stroke of luck, I spent nothing on the general election. And I was very lucky at that time. I have seen some senatorial candidates spend in excess of $100,000 in a single election cycle. That's almost obscene. Conversely, I worked for a man who won 13 consecutive terms to this legislature. He never spent more than $20,000 for both the primary and general election, and he never had any fundraisers. A successful Republican senator served 14 terms, though not consecutively, and he was also frugal with his campaign expenditures. When Guam's primaries were mandated, various factors were considered, just as important as cost, even at a time when Guam's financial conditions were just as strained and bleak as they are today. Additionally, it is debatable whether elimination of the primaries would make the election process less cumbersome, would avoid the pitfalls which were reasons for enacting the primary statutes in the first place, and most importantly, would ensure that all eligible voters are afforded their inalienable and unfettered right to vote, which are protected by statutory federal regulations. In the rush towards enactment of Bill number 45-34, it is my personal opinion that discussions and debate on this matter within the Guam legislature itself, with the Guam Election Commission, with the two political parties, and with other interested citizen groups have been at best limited in scope, or perhaps totally non-existent. I believe that the main purpose of any political party is to work for the election of its candidates. I believe that after the election, the party's work is essentially done, and it is time to let those given the trust and confidence of the electorate do their work. However, I believe just as passionately that when the suggestion is made to radically change the manner in which the electorate's trust and confidence is to be expressed, then out of simple courtesy, those proposed radical changes should be more thoroughly discussed and vetted with those who helped carry the water for the candidates and those who eventually got elected. I do not believe that public hearings such as this one are sufficient. I believe that open roundtable discussions would actually be more productive. In the first gubernatorial election on Guam, 1970, 3 Democratic teams were placed on the primary election ballot. No team was able to secure a simple majority, and in accordance with the law, a runoff election had to be conducted within 15 days of the certification of the votes. The 1970 primary election was hotly contested among the Democrats. The Republicans fielded only one team. Presidential appointed incumbents Governor Carlos G. Camacho and Lieutenant Governor Curtis Moylan. There are colorful descriptions of just how emotional this election developed for the Democrats from the beginning to the end. A more detailed analysis revealed that in the primary, the Democratic teams received a total of 12,188 votes. The Camacho Moylan team garnered 4,497 votes. After the chaos and emotion-riddled Democratic runoff election, the Republicans gained an additional 6,899 votes in the general election, while the Democrats actually lost 3,160 votes from their primary totals. More interesting is what happened in the gubernatorial election of 1974. There were no primary runoffs as the laws governing primaries were changed to permit a plurality vote to determine party nominations to the general election. However, a runoff election still had to be conducted after the general election, as no team was able to garner a simple majority of the votes. A write-in candidacy split the votes, and no one received a simple majority. The three teams garnered respectively 37%, 31%, and 27% in the general, forcing, again, another runoff. Again, the results showed evidence, for whatever reason, that there was vote migration across party lines. If voters who voted for the Cabo Palomo team had remained within their party lines, Camacho Moylan would have won a second term. It is always desirable to look for ways and means to reduce the cost of government operation, but many times what appears to be simplistic solution results in even greater costs and unforeseen outcomes. In this vein, I suggest that perhaps more thought and research should be undertaken, more in-depth and involved, but dispassionate and impassive discussion and debate held, both within and outside the halls of this legislature. Perhaps a roundtable discussion with representatives of both political parties, the Guam Election Commission, and interested citizen groups would help everyone, including potential 2018 candidates and/or anyone interested in the electoral process, and to ensure that Guam elections, whether primaries or general, are economical and effective, but also protective and guarantees the voting rights, the opportunities, and the desire of all qualified citizens of Guam. I thank you for this opportunity to appear before you on a subject that is extremely important. I think everyone should support efforts to reduce the cost of government, but extreme care must be taken that in such efforts we are not penny-wise but dollar-foolish in other critical areas of governance and public policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perez. Do any of my colleagues have any questions for this panel? I'll yield first to the author. Any of my colleagues? Gentlemen, thank you very much. Yes,
I would just like, for the record, that I'm going to submit the oral testimony that I read as a written testimony also.
Oh, absolutely. No problem, Mr. Cruz. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. We've reserved the Executive Director of the Guam Election Commission for her testimony, as it will be more technical in nature. Ms. Pangilinan, if you may join us. I'd like to reference my colleagues to the letter transmitted by the Guam Election Commission. The third paragraph was attested to earlier by the sponsor, and it will be addressed by the committee. The items on the rear of the letter, on the first, second, and third paragraphs, we have noted are areas of concern that will be addressed in the committee as amendments, if you'd like to reference the letter. Item 1 was that was brought up by the Election Commission reads, with regard to 3 GCA Section 6108, the filing of nominating petitions, Section 7 of Bill 45-34 amends the opening of the filing window to no earlier than 130 days before the election, but it omitted the closing of the window. We will need to make sure that we amend to reinstate a closing of that window. The second concern that was raised by the Commission, and this is on page 15, the second concern was with respect to the filing deadlines for the Guam Election Board and the Consolidated Commission on Utilities. There's inconsistencies that need to be reconciled. And the final issue was an issue also on page 15 that was brought up by the Commission about the posting of political signs, which in this language in the bill would limit it only to special elections, but we believe the intent was not to just limit it to those elections. So we'll be making all of those changes at the committee level. But I did want to bring forward the Executive Director for any additional items. You don't need to read the entire letter, ma'am. We'll just include it as a written testimony. But if you had any other issues you wanted to speak to, particularly with respect to the definition of majority, if we can clarify that today. Ms. Pangilinan.
Sidus Masi, Mr. Chairman. Just to let the senators also know, is the Guam Election Commission may submit additional comments after its regular meeting this Thursday. But I would like to address the senators the issue of majority. And it's a little bit convoluted, but bear with me. It's the fourth paragraph or the last paragraph on the first page. Earlier testimony of the Guam Election Commission noted that eliminating the primary election would likely result in a runoff election for the gubernatorial and congressional races, which require a majority vote pursuant to the Organic Act of Guam. Honorable Joe S. San Agustin, when introducing the bill on the floor of the regular session of Legislature in Guam, suggested that this esteemed body adopt the traditional use of majority, being the largest number. The Commission would like to know that Guam law and Organic Act distinguish between 1, the plurality of votes cast for governor and lieutenant governor in the primary election, or the candidate receiving the most elections, and this refers to public auditor and attorney general. 2, a majority of votes cast, and this is from the Organic Act, for governor and lieutenant governor, and for delegate for Guam to the U.S. House of Representatives, or 50% plus 1. That one refers to the majority required for approval of initiatives.
So the confusion that was intended to clarify was whether or not, for example, let's say we have 3 candidates or 4 candidates running for governor because there's no primary and they all go straight to a general election. And all 4 candidates get 25% of the vote, and one of them gets 26%. Does that one who gets 26% win the election, or does it need to be a runoff where there's only one that gets 50% plus 1 of the total votes?
With the way the Guam Election Commission has been operating, it would require a runoff election, so someone has to get 50% plus 1.
Of the total votes cast? Not
Yeah.
the ballot, not the
Yes,
ballots.
Yes, yes.
And that was what the Supreme Court was speaking towards, was the difference between ballots and votes.
Exactly.
Okay.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. So we just needed to clarify that because there was a little discussion in the last session. Okay, with respect to that, do any of my colleagues have any additional questions for Ms. Pangilinan? The sponsor? No? Any of my colleagues? Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Pangilinan, are you suggesting that we need to put in any additional language to maybe delete the reference to plurality of votes, or just leave that?
Madam Vice Speaker, I must say that the Guam Election Commission is ministerial in nature, and it is up to the Guam Legislature.
So, do you believe then that there would not be a need there would never be a need for a runoff in the public auditor or attorney general election because plurality of votes would just be the largest number?
That's in the code, ma'am.
Anything to add, Ms. Pangilinan? Anything to add at all? If not, we will be awaiting any potential testimony from the Commission after the Thursday meeting.
I can let you know if they're going to submit it after Friday, but if what we submitted stands, I'll let you know as well.
All right, thank you. And just for the record, anything that will be transmitted by the Election Commission as a result of that meeting, we'll go ahead and include on the record for this public hearing. Thank you, Ms. Pangilinan. That will go ahead and conclude all the individuals who have signed to testify. Do we have anyone else who has been present today that intended to testify? If none, thank you all very much for joining us. We'll go ahead and adjourn this hearing at 5:41 this afternoon, having heard Bill 45-34. Sijos Masi.